Good morning. My name's Krishna. I'm here from Manchester in the UK, and I'm going to talk a little bit about some interesting examples of unusual media experiences that are live and collaborative. In an effort really just to kind of give you some inspiration in terms of multiplayer experiences. Obviously, the games world, games developers are the experts in terms of multiplayer experiences. But my work is largely based around interactive storytelling, and I work on the fringes of games and TV and film and traditional media. And over the last few years, I've seen like a massive increase in really interesting, unusual collaborative experiences. And yeah, I wanted to share some of those with you as a sort of a way of giving you something to think about, really. What I won't be doing is teaching my grandmother to suck eggs, which, you know, I know that you guys are the experts in terms of multiplayer. This is really just unusual, interesting experiences that maybe you can have a look at. I'll put up links to everything that I think is worth checking out, and then you can make a note, and I can possibly upload it as a PDF in the system anyway. So yeah, I'm going to, obviously, you know, why this might be interesting to you. You know, I could have put up like millions of slides like this. You're not in competition with the kind of projects that I'm going to talk to you about. You're in competition with games companies like yourselves. But it's a pretty, obviously you know that it's a tricky time in the industry. It's growing, but it's kind of the margins are hard. And, you know, that's why looking at stuff from outside is useful, I think, sometimes. So, obviously, multiplayer and co-op play and playing together has been part of the video games since year one. I mean, there was a Noughts and Crosses game, which was networked in 1952, called OXO. In 1962, there was a game, Space War, which I'm sure you've heard of. 1973, Empire, and 1978 was Mud, which was invented at a UK university. The multi-user dungeon being the first kind of real alternative world, which, you know, one of the creators claims he made. Their inspiration was really a political statement in order to make a world that was better and more fun than the one that they were living in. And since 1978, multiplayer has been like a massive part of games development and video games industry. The big ones we see today largely are battle royale, first-person shooters, RPGs like Apex Legends, Fortnite, Destiny, Dota, Forza, Call of Duty, World of Warcraft, stuff like that. The games, I'm sure you've seen loads of really interesting sort of co-op and multiplayer indie games. The ones that I sort of find memorable was stuff like Keep Talking and Nobody Explodes. Journey had quite an interesting multiplayer mode, which I wasn't massively keen on, but it was interesting. Death Stranding, a couple of years ago, had some kind of interesting ideas of artifacts and found things and leaving things behind. And one of the most interesting things that I saw, which was kind of pre-pandemic, but it kind of grew massively in the pandemic, was the Jackbox Games series. I'm sure you've all seen those. I thought that was really interesting, and it was relevant both as a game and as a video game, and also to non-gamers. And in the pandemic, that thing just went through the roof, that business. And I think it was really exciting and really interesting to see something so well done that made the audience feel like they were in an interactive TV game show and that they could play remotely and have fun with their friends. Certainly, it kind of made me think about all of this stuff rather differently. The pandemic kind of accelerated what was happening anyway in terms of technology and experiences that people were having. I'm sure you know the Among Us game, which went stellar during the pandemic, along with lots of other things. But all of these, in the pandemic where people were living in isolation and suffering, loneliness and having issues and needing to find ways to connect with their friends and connect with people, these kind of experiences started to grow. And certainly some of the examples that I'm going to talk about in a couple of minutes, there were some exceptional things came out of that period. But these things were happening anyway, and I think this whole notion of shared experience and the kind of things becoming frictionless with technology was quite interesting. There's a school of thought that's largely American that's to do with traditional media, film and TV, and kind of news media, which is also quite interesting, and it's called the collective journey. And I think the champion of that is a chap called Jeff Gomez, and it's quite an interesting one to look at, and it is the idea that we are all... The collective journey is sort of an extension of the hero's journey, but it's a collaborative, communal kind of way of thinking about the way that we're experiencing stories and the way that we're experiencing the world that we live in. Largely, I think, enabled by social media, the evil social media, but it's given everybody a platform and a voice, and the whole notion of collective journey is interesting, worth checking out, but I'll leave you to have a look at that. So some of the games, some of the experiences that I wanted to talk about. The first bunch is probably Swamp Motel, who they were a product of, they worked with an English company, immersive theatre company called Punch Drunk. And in that realm, there's another company called Blast Theory, which is really interesting. But Swamp Motel, they came up with like an interactive treasure hunt escape room that happened on a Zoom call, and it was a game, and they started doing it on Zoom, and then they had a sort of breakout success. They got some really good press, and then they built their own system for it. And during the 18 months of the pandemic, the first 18 months of the pandemic, they sold, I think, 65,000 tickets to these live, theatrical, interactive game experiences. And it, at 12 euros a head, 65,000 tickets, it's good money, and it's interesting that was like a totally new format that most people hadn't really come across before. And they were able, using some smart marketing, to really grow that business during the pandemic. And the experiences are great. I mean, I've played 3, and they've been totally stellar, exceptional experiences. And I think their main IP got licensed for potentially a TV series. So that's an interesting one. Swamp Motel, certainly worth checking out. This one is really strange, really just a complete head fuck. Their stories are very psychologically strange. They're immersive audio stories. They are collaborative. They're not collaborative, but you play them together, but you're receiving different audio. And these can happen remotely, or you might be on, some of them, they set you on opposite sides of a door in a house. One person sits on one side, one person sits on the other. And it's completely bizarre and quite strange and quite interesting, and certainly takes you to some really unusual places in terms of story and the psychological aspect of kind of storytelling. And they're not very interactive, but they are worth looking at in the way that, using minimal technology and using maximum kind of creative, psychological writing skills, they are able to put people into spaces that you would never think to do so. And certainly, the idea of kind of introducing some of the techniques that they use in Dark Field Radio into games would be amazing. It would be totally incredible. Also on the rise, pre-pandemic, escape rooms, both kind of live and in video games. And during the pandemic, there were a lot of digital ones that kind of grew, and then play-at-home stuff where you download and print and then play along with an audio or a kind of an online thing. I think escape rooms obviously are inspired massively from games, from video games, and also from kind of traditional games and parlor games. And, I love the video games, nonary games, and Zero Time Dilemma. Those are really inspirational for me. And I always like to play, even though there's kind of single-player experiences, I like to play them with somebody else because it's that whole thing of like two brains being better than one, putting the hive mind onto the problem. So that's an area that's kind of growing, and that also then feeds into the more sort of play-at-home kind of interactive theatrical storytelling experiences, of which Distraction Agents is a really good one by Third Angel. Certainly unusual, very interactive, kind of play at your own pace type of thing. You can spend a week with it, or you can do it in a few hours. And what else? There's quite a few different ones. I think in my research I found stuff like Crime Scene Investigation, the American TV show, had been licensed into a play-at-home experience for multiple players. There is a Sherlock one, and I also found like 2 actors had set up a company, and they were doing stuff for kind of groups online, and it's called Murder on the 28th Floor. And they were just kind of simple, but obviously with the pandemic, the growth in kind of play-at-home stuff during the pandemic, that became like quite a good business for those guys, and really interesting. This one is a VR project which won some kind of awards. I wouldn't say I enjoyed it. I did play it. And as part of my research, I play pretty much everything that I think is an interesting interactive story. And this one, it's kind of enabled using, I think, Neos VR in Steam. And what unfolds is a game, a game in 3D that's VR, or you can play on your regular computer screen. And there are actors on behalf of the company in the story, and then there are a bunch of like up to 6 players who also become actors in the story. So you pay the money, get a ticket to be an actor in the story. And certainly loads of games do it better than this, but it's the nature of it being live and the nature of like networked actors all being together around the story and the rules that enable that. Certainly it's worth having a look at, but it wasn't a very good business model. You can only have 6 people playing at the same time. And to me, the experience sort of fell over a little bit, but up to you whether you want to try that. The last one is a thing called Secret Story Network, which actually I'm involved in, and it's very low technology. It's kind of RPG with minimum rules on chat. We started doing it about 6 years ago using WhatsApp, and we're now building our own sort of gamified chat app, which solves a lot of the problems that WhatsApp has for doing these kind of things. But again, we were doing it 5, 6 years ago, and then when the pandemic happened, we experienced our own sort of growth with a lot of audience becoming regulars, and we ran stories every Tuesday night. And it's this thing of like live experiences with people coming together, which I know is part of the multiplayer ethos, of course, but much more based around story and much more based around kind of taking people out of their comfort zones. I think multiplayer games sometimes keep people in their comfort zones, and there's some really, I think, exciting stuff happens when you take people out of their comfort zones. And yeah, I mean, that's an interesting one, and it's an ongoing project for me. So I think there's things that you can take away from those examples, especially Swamp Motel. They did a thing, their kind of ethos in terms of their storytelling is to use a lot of, they take kind of weird reality, weird real history, like the Witchfinder stuff in East Anglia in the UK in like 1700s. And then they put their own fictions over the top of that, and they spread their story and their tasks around the internet, and part of the gameplay is to discover stuff and find the clues and unlock content. And I think that's a key element of probably all of the stuff that all of the examples that I've listed, is this idea of real world colliding with story and game for the players. Certainly you can generate some very real emotions for people, and those can be very heightened, especially when people are in kind of close contact through these remote technology facilitators like Zoom and WhatsApp and chat. And the other thing that's like a massive boon is the idea that this stuff is kind of time sensitive and it's live, it's appointment, and that generates the opportunity for real marketing buzz, which if you're trying to sort of break through with your game or your whatever it is that you're trying to do, then this is a real kind of opportunity, I think. And even now we're experimenting with some things on like 2 game developments for mobile, where we take stuff out of the game and create like live interactive versions of that sort of that element of story and interaction happening online at a certain moment in time. Kind of using Unity and Amazon Web Services plugged together to do that sort of stuff. It certainly works really, really well. So yeah, that's what I wanted to share with you. I'm sort of fascinated with all of this sort of stuff, and we're doing more and more work in the games industry, but certainly I'm on the fringes of that. My work is largely experimental and research and development, but we're making some interesting stuff, and it's been really nice to be here and hearing stuff and sharing stuff. So yeah, thanks for your time. I'm happy to answer any questions if there are any. But maybe there aren't any. Aha. I can have a question. Okay.
But instead of bringing the mic, you really have to put a person on the spot, huh? My question is, at the end of your talk, you've kind of touched on some elements of these games, because most of these games are kind of orchestrated, as in they're either games that are existing and you can play them, or they're like tickets, like they happen at a certain time. What's the crossover between those and like ARGs, augmented reality games, where it's some sort of game placed in like reality or on the internet?
Well, I think it's like, I guess if I understood your question correctly, it's like spinning kind of an ARG a little bit around what it is that you're doing. in terms of your game and your community, your audience, and some kind of real story DNA or interactive DNA from your game kind of then being put out onto the internet as kind of ARG elements. And hopefully, as with kind of live instances of that, which create more buzz. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. Thanks.
Cool. Okay. Well, thank you. Really appreciate your listening, and it's been a pleasure. Cheers.
Thank you.